Okay, coming up next, our next presenter is Margarita Longoria, and her session title is Embracing Identity and Why Cultural Relevant Literature Matters in Schools. So we are in for a treat. I'm going to give you the controls, Margarita, and you can just take it away. I'll stay on just to make sure that we can see your screen, and then you're good to go. Okay?
Okay. This screen. Sure. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Margarita Longoria, and I am here to talk about culturally relevant literature and why it's important in schools. This is me. I'm trying to figure. We joined FFA this year, and I thought it was just going to be like fun on the farm. Oh my God, there's so much to do. I have 2 lambs, and my 2 sons are showing lambs, and and I couldn't come to the practice sessions because we've been trying to they just brought the lambs to the farm, so we're trying to get it's just been crazy. Okay, well, anyway, I'm Margarita Longoria, and this is me. You can find me at Margie's Must Reads. A little bit about me. I like to share a little bit about me whenever I do presentations. I love all kinds of things. I'm part of like all these fandoms. I love Superman and Batman and Aquaman and all the mans in all the comic worlds. I love them. And of course, I love Mr. Darcy. And he's my favorite fictional character from all time, which means, of course, I love Edward Cullen because Edward Cullen is Mr. Darcy. And then I love Mickey Mouse, who was my first fictional love. And I love to fish. These are my boys. I have 2 sons who are my whole entire world. And I have a husband who I like sometimes too. Okay, so why culturally relevant literature matters in school and why this is so important to me. I'm very passionate about this particular topic because growing up, I'm a Mexican girl. I grew up in the border of Texas. I'm a Tejana. I grew up born and raised here in Texas. I live right on the Texas-Mexico border. And growing up, I was a big reader. My mom, I was very lucky. Both my parents were readers and college graduates and all. My mother went back to school when I was little. My mom taught high school. And then when she had me and my brother, she went back to school to teach to get her elementary certification so she could go teach elementary school. So she was always studying with her groups, her little friend groups or her study groups at the library. And we would go to the Edinburgh Public Library. I grew up in the Edinburgh Public Library and I loved it. It was just the most beautiful place in the world. It was like heaven to me. And the librarians, that's when I realized I wanted to be a librarian when I was a very little girl visiting the library with my mom. And I remember reading all the books, every book I read. And my father had lots of books and I read all his books, Westerns and everything. And I loved everything. And I guess when I was a kid, I didn't realize that, because I guess my favorite books were like Sweet Valley High, and I loved The Outsiders. That was my favorite book growing up. And I was able to relate to all these characters through different ways. Like, the Wakefield girls, they were in high school and they had friends, and I could relate to all that. And The Outsiders, you could relate to the camaraderie of like the friendships. And there was just a bunch of, they're all universal themes. And it wasn't until I started teaching, I taught 8th grade reading. And of course, I bring all the books that I love for my kids to read. And The Outsiders was one of them. And I remember one day, one of my boys was like, Miss, they love The Outsiders. They were like, where are the books about the Mexican kids, like the Mexican gangs? And I thought to myself, like, where are the books about the Mexican kids and the Mexican gangs, right? So, or not the Mexican gangs or whatever, but he was wondering, like, why do we read books about Mexican kids? And because there were none, there were not a lot of books about Mexican kids. It wasn't until I decided to research a little bit more about books by Mexican writers. And I discovered there wasn't a lot. There was, the one that I found was The Jumping Tree by Dr. Dinesh Saldana. He was my professor in college, and he was amazing. He was one of the first writers from the Valley where I lived to be published. Can you see it? By Penguin Random House, which was huge back in the day. And I remember whenever he got his publishing deal, what I love about that, so I read this book and I thought, you know what, I'm going to read this with my kids, because this book, it has a lot of landmarks where we live. I live in Mission, Texas. That's where I teach. And the landmarks in this book are all like the Kmart when it was open, the Foy's supermarket when it was open, and all the different the mall, the beach, everything, like all of our, there's a lot of things here that our kids could read. And so we read this book and they loved it. Because they had been to Foy's, they had been to Kmart, they had been to the beach. And so it was very, and it like inspired me to like, I need to find more books for my students, because I realized my upbringing was different than theirs. And so although I could relate to all books, they wanted something a little bit more relevant to them, and I didn't blame them, and they should have those stories that are relevant to them. So to me, all people deserve respect, all cultures deserve and to be seen and heard, and all histories must be taught with truth and wisdom. You know how it's going on right now in Florida with how they're deciding to change history, and it happened, the Texas has a similar thing going on too. And the thing is, I'm from Texas, so it's all comes like down to us, and it's starting to really, like, it's been upsetting me for years. So, and preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect. This is one of my favorite quotes by Cesar Chavez, because just because I love my culture, I love my Mexican culture, my Mexican American culture, does it mean that I don't respect and love other cultures as well? And does it mean that we can't read other books about other cultures and learn about other cultures? Because we should. That's exactly what books are for. Books are like, what do they say? Portable magic. So here's my story. As a former teacher, I remember there wasn't any books for our kids in the classroom, and I love anthology. So I started, I picked up, of course, in college, because even in college, I didn't have a lot. I didn't learn about Mexican American studies and Mexican American literature until I went to college, because there was one class that I took, or a couple of classes, because that's all there was to take. And I remember reading a couple of anthologies by Sandra Cisneros, and a lot of these stories, because I taught 8th grade, a lot of these stories I couldn't use in my classroom, because some of her stories were a little bit, they weren't 8th grade, but some of them were. So I could, I picked little stories out of different books that I found. There's one called Echo in Texas. It's edited by, I don't remember who edited it, but there's a lot of Texas writers in there. So I would pull, little stories out of there for my kids to read. But I use novels and picture books and chapter books as well. And not only did I do culturally relevant literature in my class, I did other stuff. Like we read Twilight, Hunger Games, and all that kind of stuff. But it was very important to me and important to my kids. I didn't realize how important it was until I was in the classroom, how important it was to them, how they felt seen and respected. And this is awesome that there's a book out here in the world at the bookstores that has, our city in it. So that was very, very important to see. And I know that publishers are becoming a little bit more mindful when it comes to diversity, but we're still very, very, young adult literature is doing well, or children literature is doing well. We're still lacking in like romance and historical fiction and all that kind of stuff, but hopefully we're getting there. And I've seen firsthand how it's changed, how we're represented in the book world, and whose stories get told. A lot of times still, Mexican Americans, we are the biggest minority in the country, and we're still the least represented in publishing. So that's kind of frustrating, because there's still a lot of lack of representation for all of culturally relevant literature. And one of these ways that and that's why it's very important that as librarians, we make sure that we have a diverse, colorful bookshelf. Because, if we have a child that comes in from whatever culture, and they're going to want to see themselves in and on the shelf. So, hold on, I'm trying to move this out of the way. Okay, there. Hold on. Okay, mirrors. Mirrors are very important. Our students need to see themselves in the books that they read. And, and as I got older, I didn't realize that the little girl in me wanted to see that too. Like, I didn't know that. I guess growing up, being a brown kid, there weren't brown books when I was little. So I didn't even realize to ask, where are the brown books? Because there just weren't any. And then I loved books, so I would just read them. And now that I'm an adult, I feel like, why didn't I realize, or why didn't I ask? I guess we were never told we could ask. And I'm so proud of our kids now that are so bold and like, where are our stories? And I'm so proud of writers now that, like we realize that we lost out on all this as as young kids. And so we as writers now are trying to bring out stories for our kids, for all of the kids, so to kind of like make up for the childhood that we didn't have when it came to books. So it's very important that that children see themselves in the books that they read. And there was an essay. I have a lot of quotes and stuff from other librarians and stuff, because I think it's very important, because librarians, we're the smartest people in the world. And we've done a lot of research about culturally relevant literature and why it's important in the classroom and in libraries. And it's very important for our kids. They're like mirrors and windows, and sliding, like, so what I'm saying is they need to see, when they read the book and they see themselves in it, they feel validated. They feel like, wow, they have like a sense of identity, and they feel respected. And it's very important for them to, and it kind of like validates their, I like the bottom quote, our sense of identity, value, and agency are influenced by a wide array of different things, including home life, school, environment, and society, which includes the books we read. And all the books, the picture books, as children, we need to start with culturally relevant literature as even in picture books. My screen's gone. Well, okay, well, Windows, my next slide was, I think it was, hold on, I don't know where my slideshow went. It says that I've been.
Okay, I'm gonna set you back up. Don't worry, no worries. Sorry about that. There you go. Sorry about that.
Do I share it again?
Yeah, just share it again.
Okay, so it's very important that they see themselves as in windows. Okay, and then, I mean mirrors, and then windows for others to see us. I think it's so important for other people, any other person, to read books, to see other cultures. I'm trying to remove all this stuff out of the way. And another nod to Miss Bishop, books that represent a variety of cultures, and they help people understand those that are different. And this is very true. There's studies all over the place that show that books create empathy. And the younger we start teaching, giving our children books about different cultures, different people, different experiences, our children will start to develop empathy for others, and just to walk in the shoes of another person, just to see what life is like on the other side of the world. A lot of times, I've never been, it's funny because we have, I have an anthology, and I, as a librarian, you think I would have known, somebody told me, Margie, look at, there's a catalog called what is it called? Webcat.org, something like that. Well, anyway, it's a catalog that's the catalog of all the books, of all the books in the libraries around the world, right? And Ruben goes, Google or put in the little search bar, Living Beyond Borders. And I did one day, and to see where that book is, where our stories are all over the world, in Zimbabwe, in Dubai, in places I will never be. And some of those people in Dubai, in Zimbabwe, in New Zealand, wherever it is, they're never going to come to United States, or they might never come. Some might, some may, some won't. But they're never. But the stories that they hear about the border are always like, oh, the influx of immigrants swimming across the Rio Grande, like all these crazy stories that you hear about the Texas border. A lot of it is dramatized. I mean, yes, we have problems, but a lot of it is just sensationalized for media and for this and for that, right? So the stories in our anthology are true events, or true like depictions of what it's like to grow up in the Mexican American in America, on the border, in California, in Kansas, everywhere, because Mexican Americans are everywhere. So whenever I put this anthology together, I made sure to ask authors from all over the country to get the different types of places, because my experience along the border is a little bit different, Margarita, from the experience of a Mexican American in like Boston or something. So I made sure to get all of that in the story. So it's so important that books build that. Books give the reader that kind of insight to what's going on in the world for real, and not kind of like what we see on TV, and marginalized children. It's like, I'm not the only one. Our, Mexican American kids aren't the only ones that should be reading The Jumping Tree. Everybody should be reading The Jumping Tree. Everybody should be reading Angie Thomas. Everybody should be reading everything, hi, WorldCat. Yeah, I think it's worldcat.org. Yes.
Sorry about that, Margarita. I'm trying to turn off some cameras. If you are a panelist, please turn your camera and your microphone off, because it's interrupting the current presenter. And I do apologize, Margarita. Sorry about this.
Okay.
I just want everybody to hear what you are saying. Okay. All right. So I'm making you the host again. Okay. And we're ready to go. There you go. You can reshare.
Okay. I think I was here on Windows. Okay. So Windows, I think it's very important that all of us read books from all cultures, all different ethnicities, and all different experiences. So that way we can learn, because like, I don't know anything about being a gay boy or something, so, to read a book about a gay boy gives me a little bit more understanding and insight to what's going on in the mind and in the heart of a gay boy. And it's just very important that we do that, and that we teach our children that they need to do that too, our students, to read books about other people as well. Okay. And reading builds community. It's so important for us. Like, I know I love Schoolwide reads. I know a lot of times I've tried to do them, and I've been successful with some, not successful with others. But I think, and then some, cities do citywide reads and stuff. And I think it's very important whenever we do that, because a whole community comes together on one book, and then everybody has a different like take on what they read. I know we all interpret, and that's the beauty about literature, is that you interpret it the way you want to interpret it, and then you kind of can discuss. That's what I loved about teaching reading. We would read a story, and then my kids would go, I remember thinking, like, they would come up with the most amazing things, and I was like, I know I wasn't this smart when I was in 8th grade. Like, these kids were so amazing, and they still are. Like, I love to give books to my high school kids, and they'll come back and we'll start talking about them, and they just have so much, like, their take on the world is very different from my take, of course, because we're growing up in different times, yet we still have kind of the same universal, we share the same universal like thoughts about some of the themes and stuff. So it's just so fun to be able to have book reads and book talks about, with the whole group about books, and it gives the members of the community the opportunity to learn something new together, and it's fun like that. Okay. And it also, I know a lot of times, what I love to do during 9/11, because the kids now, and our seniors in high school now, they weren't alive when 9/11 happened, right? So when 9/11 comes around, we do a couple of 9/11, and there's a lot of books now, like, and those books are considered historical fiction, because although they're not, it's crazy to me to think that a book when I was alive is considered, and I wasn't even old. I was like at college. So it's like, wow, is that, and I'm like, that's historical now, but it is, because it happened at a time where people, like, for this particular little generation, they weren't alive. So they're reading these stories. Like Jewel Rhodes, I think it's her book, Towers Falling, I think it's what it's called. That book is so powerful. And when the kids read it, I mean, it's like, wow, because they get to experience what happened through, like, to these kids during 9/11 without having, and then they understand a little bit why, because like a lot of times they don't understand, like, why is everybody so crazy about 9/11? Because they don't understand the impact that it had on us. And when they read stories like that, then they can begin to understand. Same books about like World War II, why was it such a big deal, the World War II? Well, they read books and then they realize, wow, this is why it was so important. And this is why it's important to not forget, and why we need to always remember our history, our true history. And I think it's also important for our kids to realize that we're all kids. Like, the kids that grow up here in the Rio Grande Valley are the same kids that grow up in Dallas and, in Arkansas, and they all feel the same. We all bleed the same. These kids all go through the same kind of growing pains, the same coming of age experiences. And I think books like that help them realize, well, hell, this little girl is going through, she had her period too, or she fell in love too, or he got into a fight with his girlfriend, or whatever, football or whatever. All these books help these kids realize we're all the same. And I think it's very important to share books about joy. I know a lot of times when it comes to people of color, everybody wants to think like, okay, we've always had this. And yes, we do struggle. A lot of, our cultural people, ethnic people, or we do have, there's been a lot of struggle, like with the Mexican American, our history, although it's not taught in schools. It's been a very ugly, violent history, just as African American history, Asian American history, Native American history. It's not pretty. None of it is. It's a lot of struggle, a lot of very, very traumatic and very terrible, ugly things that happened to our ancestors. But we also have joy. So, we have families that we love, and we go to school, and we have friends, and there's a lot of books out now that have stories about the joy of being just a young adult, or just a child, or just a kid, but a kid of color. And I think it's important that we show those books as well as the books about all the struggle. This is a quote that I like, because all voices need represented. Like I said, I got some quotes from librarians around the country. When the only stories told in a school library are white people's, then the message to Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American students is clear. Your experience does not matter. Meanwhile, if you're a white kid who only sees and reads books about white kids, you get an inflated sense of how important whiteness is. And this is very important that we not do this, because we're all important. All our stories are just as important as the other. This is another one that I like. A good book can help you understand what it's like for people who don't share your race, religion, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status. Diverse books teach empathy. And this is Erica Long, a librarian in Tennessee. And it's true. Books do teach empathy. There's studies on that. They say the Harry Potter generation is probably one of the most empathetic, beautiful generations because of the Harry Potter books, because of the how all the themes in Harry Potter. So I think that's very important. And then this is my quote: books bring cultures and people together. I'm a firm believer that if you don't understand something, you should read about it. People are often misinformed about many serious issues. And if given the opportunity to walk in someone else's shoes, even through the pages of a book, you can begin to understand. So before we judge, before we hate, before we form ideas about something we know nothing about, it is important to be informed. And books give you that power. Books are so, so powerful. And these are just some books I wanted to leave you guys with by some of my favorite writers. These are some of my favorite Mexican American writers. What I love about Matt de la Peña's Superman book is that Superman is half white, half Mexican. And that's because Matt is half white, half Mexican. So when he wrote Superman, he wrote Clark Kent in this book. That's what Superman, and it made me so, so happy when it came out. And then these are just other books that I love. Guadalupe Garcia McCall, this is the second one in her series. Anne-Marie McLemore, I love, she's such an amazing fantasy writer. And this is a really good, these are all, I love this one by Anne Marino. This is a book about Quidditch. So, and then of course I love Alejandra here. I love everybody. Everybody in these, okay, why doesn't it want to move? Oh, there we go. And here's some more books by other Latino writers. I love, and then here's some picture books. So these are by other Latinos, because the Latino culture, we have a lot of ethnic groups like under our umbrella. These are some of my favorite Black voices. This one's one of my favorites, Pride. It's a Afro, what is it? An Afro Latino Pride and Prejudice. I loved it so much. I'm a big Pride and Prejudice fan, like I already told y'all. So when this came out, I remember I was so excited. And then I was part of Tasha's, the year that we picked this for Tasha's. So I kind of I geeked out whenever I met her. I was a little embarrassed. I don't know why I did that, but I felt like I was just so excited because I loved this. I loved her take on it. I love to read different Pride and Prejudice retellings, and this one was I was super excited about it. Here's some more. Some of my favorite writers, some of my favorite books have come out in the past few years by Black writers. Asian American literature. These are some of my favorites. And these writers are some of my favorites. Because Maureen Gu writes a lot of books. This is one of her early ones. So she writes a lot of them. Stacey Lee has tons. the Titanic one that just came out a couple years ago. That's probably one of the newer ones, but I like to put the older ones sometimes, because sometimes people don't, like when they discover an author, like when the book is real huge, they don't realize the whole backlist about the author. So I kind of like to do that. And Payal, this is a super amazing, like a fantastical Indian story. And her story behind why she wrote this book is amazing too. And it's basically because when she was young, she didn't have, there were no Indian super magical people. So she made one, and it's amazing. These are Native American stories. This one's one of my, I love them all. This one is like a retelling of Wuthering Heights. And then this one is a retelling of Peter Pan. And then of course, Island of Dolphins is a classic. And then these are all great. And we have, I know, I always think it's important to include LGBTQ literature, because they are a culture that is very, very, they're being attacked right now. And there's so many, and they need to not feel alone. Alex Sanchez is one of the first, these books right here that I have here are kind of some of the first writers that came out writing about LGBTQ communities back in the early 2000s and stuff, like 2003, with Julianne Peters, Nancy Gardens, and Alex Sanchez. So these are some important, I love, I think it's important that we showcase them too. And then anthologies. I think anthologies are wonderful ways to bring stories into the classroom, because I know it's hard to read a whole, so you can tell your teachers, it's hard to read a whole novel in the classroom sometimes, but anthologies are perfect because you can pick stories out and that you can use in the classroom and teach everything that you need to teach with anthologies. And these are, you can find me. I think I'm out of time. If you guys have any questions, you can ask me. Let me see. Are these books written in Spanish? Some of them are written in English and Spanish. Some of them. Everything that I put here right now is in English, but I know there's several that have been translated. Like my anthology, Living Beyond Borders, was translated into Spanish. So that was real exciting for us. And I know a lot of David Bowles' books are translated into Spanish. So yeah, it just depends on the publisher. What else? Anybody else?
No, it's just a lot of love that's in the chat all throughout your presentation, because everyone was in agreement with a lot of the books. Like you put Jenny Han on the page, and I went nuts because my students love Jenny Han, you know? And it is amazing with all of the authors that are now coming to the forefront, because this is my 25th year working in the libraries, and this is just an amazing time, and I just hope that it grows and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Me too.
Wow, this was a wealth of information. Thank you, Margarita. And I want to say this, I'm so sorry about the interruption. Unfortunately, I don't have dual controls for hosts, so I had to stop you, and I didn't want to, have any sound in the background. So that's why I had to stop you. But thank you. Look, y'all, go in the chat. Give Margarita some love, because she trooped through this. I had to interrupt her twice, and go online and please give her some love and follow her. You have are you on Threads or Twitter at all?
I'm on Twitter. I'm not on Threads because how many things? I'm mostly on Instagram. At Margie's Must Reads, and then I'm on Twitter. And I'm because I can't do them all. It's too. I have two lambs. I can't do it all.
That's cool. And somebody said in the chat, said, "Oh my God, her background looks just like mine." Books everywhere. If I were to take this background off, it'd be a nightmare. Y'all see some stuff and be like, "Oh my God, all those books in Casey's background." Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're a treasure, and please follow Margarita online, especially on Instagram.
Thank you.